So that gives us approximately 10 minutes to field some questions. Not that this is a controversial topic and anyone could possibly have a question on it, but do I see? Yes, right here. Do we have microphones?
It seems to me that the whole of the Dardanelles is surrounding blame for somebody. Oh, thank you. Surrounding blame for somebody. And I spent 2 weeks in the Dardanelles and came away with certain ideas and things I'd heard. And it seems that it started by Turkey ordering 2 cruisers to begin with for Britain. And then they heard that the Germans were moving in a big way. So they canceled those 2 cruisers, and that started the blood to boil. And the idea was to open everything up so that Russia could find an open sea. After all, Vladivostok is frozen for a great deal of time. When the ships went down, it wasn't so much the guns on either side. They were by the Turks. They were run by Germans, but that didn't do the damage. It was mainly the mines which had been floating around. They tried to clear them, but they're the ones that got most of the ships. When that couldn't be achieved, then the armies moved in. And when the Australians arrived, they arrived in the wrong areas, as Harry Atkinson has mentioned, but they rushed up to the cliffs and they tried to take the top. When the large British army came under Hamilton, they landed in this big bay and they played soccer. They tried to install railway lines, and they missed the whole opportunity of taking the whole area. And I think if blame is to come into it, you have to blame Hamilton and how he conducted his army. So I'd like to comment here, because he's never been mentioned. I'd like to hear what he has to say.
Well, let's ask Dr.
No relation here. But most certainly, Ian Hamilton made tremendous mistakes. I don't know the details of what you're speaking about right at this very moment, but he obviously was cashiered at the end. He was never called back for service. And also the point that you made about the mines is very accurate as well. The mines did tremendous damage. The trawlers, the mine sweepers, were actually merchantmen, if you can believe this. They were not professional military people, and so the sweeping of the mines was very very lax as well. And but Hamilton most certainly did not do a good job.
I think we have to remember as well that Surrey and Hamilton only had a very short time to put it all together, and he was under tremendous pressure from Kitchener and also the War Council. I just thought I'd mention that.
Bosch, is your husband here, right? I would apologize for using the word blame.
In the various sources recounting the Dardanelles, I haven't heard today any mention of the obstacle that Lord Fisher placed in Churchill's path or in the planning for Dardanelles. And I'm surprised I haven't heard more about Fisher.
Well, I'm all happy to feel that. It's just a matter of time more than anything else. And it's a wonderful story in many ways. My personal view is that, again, Churchill made a horrendous mistake by bringing Admiral Fisher back as First Sea Lord. You're talking about a man in his 70s. Churchill was 40 years old. They were completely opposites in terms of their personalities. And ultimately, I think it can be said that the resignation of Admiral Fisher was one of the nails in Churchill's coffin in May of 19 15, but they were continually arguing with each other, and I think that contributed to some of the difficulties of the planning. But Admiral Lord Fisher was a very significant personality in this whole Dardanelles campaign. He was the first Sea Lord.
We are talking about blame. My question would be blame for what? What would Churchill's relative blame for the operation being screwed up, if you will, be, versus what would his share of the blame for the casualties be? Were most of those not incurred after the operation had been taken out of his hands? Or is that not correct?
Well, I'll give a shot at that. Yes, you're correct. I mean, Gallipoli the Gallipoli campaign was the great casualty loss, but Churchill's influence in my reading began to wane as it was clear that Dardanelles was a failure, and Asquith was extremely irritated with Winston Churchill, as was Lord Kitchener. Again, the word blame is difficult. It has to be shared, and I think, as I mentioned, Lord Kitchener has increasingly received some of the criticism. He was an immensely powerful individual, and no one in the War Council argued with Lord Kitchener. But again, Churchill was First Lord of the Admiralty and had many responsibilities. And also, it must not be forgotten that after the two attempts, disastrous attempts, to go through the Dardanelles, Churchill wanted to do yet another one. So I think that says something, that even after the February and March attempts, he wanted to go further, but his influence had waned considerably by that point. So yes, the word blame is difficult, but this was a very difficult paper for me to do as a great admirer of Sir Winston Churchill, because it basically was a failure. It was a disaster, and not too many individuals, I think, could have survived this, but he did. I mean, and that shows, I think, the resilience and what I started out by saying. His own wife thought he was going to die from this, so there was a tremendous guilt and a torment that he carried through his life.
Okay, we've got time for one last question from Craig.
My question has to do with supplies and artillery supplies in particular for the Turks. As I've read somewhere, they were pretty much out of ammunition, out of artillery toward the end of the invasion, and that possibly just a few hours short of victory for the Allies. Is that true? Or
There is a quote, I actually just found it then, it's in one of my other papers, that a Turkish officer called Enver Pasha wrote about the Dardanelles, and it was after they called off the naval-only component of the Dardanelles campaign, and I quote, "If the English had only the courage to rush more ships through the Dardanelles, they could have taken Constantinople, but their denial enabled us to thoroughly fortify the peninsula, and in 6 weeks' time, we had taken down their over 200 Austrian guns." So you are correct. There was a point there, and it's interesting because Churchill was, he kept sending telegrams. He said, "Push them through, push the ships through," and he was overruled by the admirals, and he technically was right. If Churchill got his way, and they did try, they may have got through, but who knows?
Can I add a point? This is hindsight. We now know that they were short of ammunition. But at the time, the Anglo-French expeditionary force had no clue at all So it's easy, of course, to rewrite history after the battle.
Can I just ask, in regard to that, what about the Room 40 decrets that Fisher knew about? He said, I'll go through, I'll go straight through. It strikes me that that was like ultra in the Second World War. They did know that the Turks were down to their last ammunition. So that was an incredibly important point, I think.
He was overruled by the admirals.
Well, if I have a minute again, it was not so much the guns, but as was said before, it was the mines. The French disaster for the Bouvet was not due to the guns at all, but to the mines, because something had not been realized, the strong currents. Apparently, for some reason, the admiral said he didn't know that there were strong currents in the straits, and it was impossible to locate the mines. You might locate them at, say, each hour, at hour 1, but in hour 3, the mines would be in a different place. So it's extremely complex, and Churchill himself always says that in war there are surprises, you never know what's going to happen. So it was a gamble. Here I'm expressing the French point of view again. It was a gamble. The French said, all right, well, let's try. It won't cost a lot, at least to the French, because, as I said, their navy was underemployed.
And on that note, we're going to have to
But
conclude.
the great error, of course, was to persist.
Okay, thank you very much.